England depth chart for 2021. We're going to have a look through the guys Eddie Jones has picked throughout the 2021 season to see what kind of depth has been built, where are all the minutes going, which guys are getting the most time, what's been the most picked 15 over the course of the season, and what maybe will we expect to see in 2022. I've done this for the All Blacks and for the Springboks already. The Springboks one kind of has a bit more of an intro as to kind of where this idea comes from and whatnot. So do watch that one if you're curious. But let's get down to England's squad. Eddie's an interesting one, and I'm fortunate that I've recently seen an interview that Michael Checker gave with Eddie, because it's sometimes hard to work out what the heck Eddie's doing. Like after the World Cup, we didn't really see kind of wholesale changes from England, and there's been a lot of kind of young guys on the cards for a while that people have been calling out for, and they've not really gotten much time. But we've seen that happen, and what Eddie has said, which was maybe a crucial one into understanding his logic, is that he seems to have this idea that it's about a 3-year building period. So to get the guys to peak for a World Cup, you start 3 years out. That's why you don't kind of make the wholesale changes from immediately after the previous World Cup. So 2020 was kind of more of what we'd seen in 2019. But 2021, pretty much after the Lions tour, is where we saw maybe what will be more of a new look England side going into the 2022-2023 seasons. But anyway, it's interesting just to get that bit of insight that he thinks to get them to peak, it's 3 years. Anyway, we'll start with some forwards for England. The front row, the most important area of the park. And it's a bit of a mixture. If you're looking at loose head, number one, it's a mixture between Genge and Mako. Ellis Genge is there in green. Mako Vunipola is there in blue. And plus you've had a few other guys who've gotten some minutes over the time, like Bevan Rod. Joe Marler is there as well. I mean, it's mostly Genge and Mako for the most part, but Mako may be one of those guys who's going to be on the outer going forward, so those blue minutes may be kind of taken up by someone else in 2020. Hooker, likewise, it's kind of been your regular two guys. Jamie George is there in green. Luke Cowan-Dickey's there in blue. And interestingly, Jamie George seemed to maybe have been on the outer, but he was given a bit of a reprieve towards the end of 2021 with injuries to England in that department. So he did end up getting called back into the squad. Blamire is there in yellow, and Langdon is there in purple as well. Nick Dolly did get some kind of token minutes there in red, but yeah, whether Jamie George continues to be the kind of mainstay guy going into 2022 is also under a bit of a question mark, given that he only just kind of scraped into the squad with injuries this season. Tight head's a bit more clear cut. It's pretty much Kyle Sinclair there in green, and then whoever else is filling in his absence in the other colours. So Will Stewart's there in blue, Hayes is there in yellow, Hill's there, Davison's there, Harry Williams is there. But for the most part, it's about Kyle Sinclair. He's the only front rower who's kind of had more than half the minutes throughout the season. So he is definitely your main guy, and he probably has even more minutes there if it's not for the Lions tour. So yeah, interesting looks at the front row. Only one that's kind of a clear dominant one, but I would have thought going forward, Genge will bump up his minutes, maybe similar to what we see from Sinclair if Mako is kind of not in the picture, but we'll see. Locks is also a bit of an interesting one because you got three main guys. If you're looking at number 4, it's Maro Itoje. Pretty much like 4/5 of the minutes throughout England's season, and that's despite the fact that he goes on a Lions tour. He gets a heap of minutes. That's just kind of how essential he is to England's setup. For 5, it's pretty much split between Johnny Hill and Charlie Ewels. And I remember Hill went on the Lions tour as well, so Ewels kind of cranked up. I think he got a couple of 80-minute performances against Canada and the USA during the Lions tour time. So that time was more Johnny Hill's way, if not for the Lions tour, I reckon. But then you've got a bunch of randoms, seemingly, filling in when Itoje is not available. You got Wells there, McNally, Ted Hills jumped in there, Callum Chicks jumped in there for a short time. Yules has jumped across at one point briefly to play alongside Hill. They usually kind of swap, but that's kind of your story. It's Itoje far and away your dominant force there in the second row, and then probably Hill with Yules as your backup. As I said, that green for Hill is probably a lot bigger, if not for the Lions store, at least a fair bit bigger, because that's almost an even split between the two guys. The back row, this was a bit of a mission to allocate all these minutes out. Bloody hell, there were a lot of chopping and changing. Blindside was an absolute mess. Goodness gracious me! I've never seen that many guys played in one position in one season. It's bonkers how many guys. Like, we'll go with the open side first because that's remarkably simple. Tom Curry, Sam Underhill, green and blue, and then Ben Earl in there in yellow with a bit of a cameo. But it's Curry and Underhill, kind of easy as you like. Number 8, there's been a bit more rotation, but it's still relatively straightforward. It's Billy V there in green. He's another guy who kind of looks to be on the outer. And then Dom Brandt's there in blue, one of those guys that I mentioned that people have been kind of crying out to see and finally did get to see. Tom Curry's there in yellow, so when they like to play him outside of the number 7 jersey when Underhill's playing, he tends to pop in there in recent times. And then you got Chick, Earl, Ludlam, and even Anthony bloody Watson on there. Trust me, he popped in for a very short time, packing down the scrum at number 8. There were some weird games, but yeah, it's basically Dom Brandt's the guy if Billy V's out the question, but there's also Tom Curry. So if Tom Curry's available, maybe he steps ahead of Dom Brandt because Eddie likes to start the old under Curry combo. Now 6, honestly, man, it's how many guys is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or 11 guys. Laws is your guy in green. Also, he goes on the Lions tour, so his minutes are reduced. Mark Wilson's there in blue, but he's kind of only at the start of the season. End of the season, I think he's been injured for a bit, hasn't he? But yeah, he seems to be out of the picture in recent times. And then Lewis Ludlow is there in yellow. So he got a decent bit of time, especially I think during the USA and Canada games. And then the rest of it is just an absolute mess. You got Ben Curry, you got Tom Curry, you got Lewis Ludlam, who I always get confused with Ludlow, but there you go, just the similar names. Itoje's popped in for a little bit. George Martin's popped in for a bit. Ben Earl, Sam Simmons, and Willis as well. So goodness me, it's messy. But Laws maybe gets more, and maybe it's not quite as messy if not for the Lions tour. So yeah, I haven't seen anything like that because I've only looked. This is only the third team I've looked at. But South Africa and New Zealand didn't have anywhere near that kind of number of players used. That's at least 4 more players used in any one position than we've seen from any other teams. Like New Zealand rotate a lot, but not within one position quite like that. So yeah, does that mean if Laws is not available, it's just a bit of a lolly scramble? I don't know. But, we'll kind of have to see how that goes for 2022. At least number 7 is nice and simple. So, yeah, across the forwards, I mean, it seems pretty clear to me that Sinclair, Itoje, very much key guys. Tom Curry as well. That's kind of, it goes without saying, you wouldn't even have to look at the minutes to kind of know those guys are key. But it's whether Dom Brandt can establish himself as a proper number 8, a starting number 8 going forward, or if they keep playing the kind of under Curry combo. Likewise, does Wilson get back into the squad? Maybe not, given that he's been kind of testing out so many other names, but none of them have pushed through enough, at least during that Lions tour period, to kind of secure a starting berth, because when Laws has been back, Laws has been playing. So yeah, we'll wait and see. Backs is also a wee bit interesting. There's been... England have gone from playing no halfbacks no scrum halves apart from Youngs to playing a bunch of guys. Looking at 9 and 10, Youngs has played a lot of time, obviously more than half, and that kind of remains to be true. But Randall's there. He's got some decent time in blue. Dan Robson, who appears multiple times in other positions because he seems to be Johnny on the spot when they play a 6-2 split and there's injuries. But Dan Robson's there. Likewise, your man Rafi Quirk is there in purple, and your man Alex Mitchell's there in red. So it's still youngs, but at least we've seen Quirk and Mitchell and Randall get some minutes. Robson, is he going to be another casualty of some of the younger guys coming through? Potentially, but man, he's versatile because, like I said, I'm not done mentioning him yet. 10, fly half. Obviously, Marcus Smith's emergence has finally kind of seen him get himself into the England squad. He is there in green. He just edges out George Ford for minutes. George Ford seemingly on the outer at the moment, despite playing pretty good stuff at Tigers. Soon to be Sale. But yeah, those guys get the lion's share between them. Owen Farrell's had a wee bit there in yellow. Furbank's had a little bit there in purple. And Robson had to stand at first receiver for a wee bit after two guys went off. I think was it Ford went off and then Farrell went off in one of the games earlier in the year. Was it the game against Ireland? I remember it was a bit messy. So yeah, you can kind of ignore that because it's not really the plan, but he just had to fill in for a short time. The midfield, also one of those ones where one's a little bit messy and one's clear cut. Like 13, Henry Slade has been just a stalwart for the team this season. Pretty much 4/5 of the time he's been there at 13. There's been a little bit of Marchant and there's been a little bit of Ollie Lawrence, but who's blue and yellow. But yeah, it's pretty much been Slade, and he seems to be pretty much in cracking form. Is like 4/5 of the time too much for any one player? Maybe, but sometimes it is good to kind of have that kind of consistency. If you do go back and watch the South Africa and New Zealand videos, you'll see South Africa and New Zealand both took very different approaches in terms of handing out the minutes, whereas England, it's kind of harder to compare because they had the Lions tour. You are just going to see so many more changes to the squad. I would imagine next year's numbers are going to look a lot more kind of straightforward. Inside centre, though, Farrell's there in green, so he's pretty much got half the time. So he still seems to be by far the preferred option. He doesn't seem to be going to get in the squad at 10 at this point. Lawrence is there in blue. Dan Kelly's there in yellow. Manu Tuilangi's there in purple. Slade has popped in a little bit in red. And then Umanga had to step in for a while in, again, one of those games where they had a 6-2 split and they had someone go down. A couple of guys go down, I think, early. And then Atkinson also got some kind of token minutes there in white. So it's largely been Farrell, which is kind of pretty clear. Lawrence has kind of been shifted around a little bit because he's had to appear on the wing at times as well. And Tuilangi is another one who kind of pops up here and there, but hasn't gotten a huge number of minutes. So it's still seemingly the Farrell and Slade show for mine, with Farrell kind of dropping into 10, and then maybe they bring in someone like Tuilangi to finish games at 12. But anyway, so yeah. And then outside backs, pretty clear cut. Johnny May is there in green. He's still by far the preferred option on that left wing. You've got a few other kind of guys who pop in. Radwan's there in blue. It's kind of good to see him emerge a little bit with some proper game time. You've got Thokana Singer there in yellow. You've got Lawrence when he's popped in purple. Daly's popped in every now and again in red. And then Max Malins has had to pop in for a brief time there right at the top in that kind of brownie colour. So left wing Johnny May. He's still got the goods even though he's past 30 at this point. Right wing has been a little bit more chopping and changing. You've had Anthony Watson, who's had almost half the time, but remember he missed the kind of tail end of the season with injury. Thokana Singer, who's split his time between both wings, is there in blue. Malins is there in yellow. Radwan, who's also split his time, is there in purple. Tuilangi. Now, I put a bit of an asterisk by Tuilangi's time, because in that game where they named him on the right wing, it was very kind of situational. It was kind of a pain in my backside to try and work out who was where. Like, off the restarts, bloody Johnny May would be out on the right wing trying to compete for the restart, but then he would go to the left wing. Tuilangi would pop into the midfield, and sometimes Stewart would come out on the right wing. it was a bit of a messy one. More messy than I've ever really seen. Like, the numbers on the backs didn't really represent that much. They kind of chopped and changed, and then Tuilangi did end up going into the midfield proper later in the game. But I've still given him largely the time on the right wing because he spent parts of that early game on the right wing. So there you go. Take that for what it's worth. Dan Robson pops up again. He had to spend some time out on the wing. Marchant and May has also spent a very short period of time out on that wing as well. So yeah, it's been messy, but largely Watson when fit. Radwan has kind of been, him and Thokana Singer have seemed to be their next cab off the rank for really either wing, with everyone else just kind of filling in when needed. Fullback, though, is a really pleasing one where you get to see that story of someone who's really come through and staked a claim, and that's Freddie Stewart. He's there with half the minutes there at fullback, all pretty much towards the tail end of the season, but he made himself that kind of absolute guaranteed starter. The injury to Elliot Daly probably helped. Daly's there in blue, and then Malins is there in yellow. So yeah, across the board, key guys, obviously I think the most of anybody has been Henry Slade. He's up there. Then you're looking at Youngs and Itoje and Sinclair. These are kind of your key guys. And then everyone else, maybe Johnny Hill's played just over half. Tom Curry's played just over half. A lot of the other guys have played less than kind of half the minutes all season. Farrell's played less than half at 12, but also remember he was away for the Lions tour. Watson's played less than half. He was injured for a bit. Genge's played less than half, but if Michael doesn't play, he plays more. Likewise, Jamie George and Cowan Dickey kind of splitting their time. So, in terms of how this compares to not Australia, New Zealand and South Africa, South Africa, their starting guys played like 65% of all the minutes. That's how much they rely on their guys who start get the lion's share. Whereas New Zealand was less than half. It was 49%. New Zealand very much on the kind of rotational bandwagon. One guy starts 1 week, another guy starts another week. They almost kind of went through an A-team, B-team phase depending on who they were playing. England's in the middle. England's on the starting guys have played 55% of the minutes. So yeah, the Lions tour again is a bit disruptive in that, but it kind of just gives you a bit of an indication on how much they are doing in terms of blooding some of the guys who aren't necessarily the starters. The 15 that has played the most minutes in each kind of position, front row, Genge, George and Sinclair. The main question mark I have for next year is about Jamie George. Is he going to go on, or will they push him back down the pecking order? Itoje and Hill, the lock and duo, kind of no surprises there. Laws, Curry and Billy V. 6, 7, 8. Billy V is the one I've circled as a potential change for 2022. Youngs and Smith is the 19 combo. That maybe looks like the one that's going to be going forward. It's hard to know with Eddie. Farrell and Slade, the midfield, that seems to be locked in based on what we see here. And then May, Watson and Stewart there at fullback in terms of the most kind of selected 15. Remember, a bunch of guys had injuries this year. Daly had injuries. Watson had injuries, so yeah, and the Lions tour also kept guys out. Cowan Dickey was out at the end of the season, so he might have got more minutes than George if not for that, and he was on the Lions tour, so it is all about peaking for that World Cup. They won 7 from 10, and it was, I guess, pleasing for Eddie Jones to kind of finish the year on a high after a relatively disappointing Six Nations campaign. I make it that they used 53 players, which is more than South Africa and New Zealand who used in the 40s. But again, Lions Tour means you're without a handful of your players for those mid-year games, although against Canada and USA, Eddie may have chosen to experiment even if not for the Lions Tour. Just continuing on the point about changes for 2022, the guys who you maybe have to question, Ford, Wilson, Robson, Mako and Billy, like, will we see these guys back? Kind of remains to be seen. Has Sam Simmons been a bit underused? We've only really seen him. He went on the Lions tour, but he popped in on the blind side very briefly, but we haven't seen much compared to Don Brandt. And even Don Brandt was less than Billy V. Breakthrough guys, clearly I think Stewart and Marcus Smith, the fact that they would be in that kind of most picked 15 just barely, but still make it, shows you the kind of immediate impact they've had. Some of the other kind of more fringe guys, the likes of Chick, and, the Ludlam and Ludlow, can they kind of break into the side proper? Ben Earl and Willis and co. It's It's hard to say. Radwan, I think, has proven his stuff at the international level from what we've seen of him. But yeah, it is going to be an interesting one to watch in 2022. I think it'll be more stable, as I said. I think with Eddie kind of drawing the line in the sand this year is that marker. The start of the season is the old guard, and then from basically July, that's when you start the proper building for the World Cup, which seems different from the way everyone else is doing it, but he's got that 3-year plan. I guess maybe we see things be a bit more stable, because when Eddie gets those guys, like traditionally, you know, back when it was Dylan Hartley and Mike Brown and whatnot, those guys they played every week, right? So that seems to be what he likes to do if he's got the players available, but he's still just trying to kind of pick out that starting 15 or starting 23 for the moment. But anyway, I've gone on for 20 minutes, so I better call it quits. You guys let me know your thoughts. How do you reckon this lines up? Who else do you think kind of pushes their way into Eddie's side? Do you think any of these kind of regular guys, the likes of a Laws or a Youngs, you know, or even maybe a Watson, can you see any of these guys being surpassed between now and the World Cup? I'm sure there will be some goings on. If you want England Rugby gear, I'll put a link to England Rugby store in the description. They always have sales on. So yeah, they're an affiliate of the channel. Happy days if you want to use that and pick yourself up some England gear. But yes, do let me know your thoughts, guys, and we'll talk to you again soon. See you later.